Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another Marvel Snap video. And so as you can tell, we are at 3,400 collection log level. We have 9 card pulls that we can do, and the last 3 collector's reserves that we've pulled have all been back-to-back cards. We're going to see if we can go for the 4 in a row, but before we do that, it is the final stretch. Before long, you won't have to hear me rant about it until we get closer to 4,000 or 5,000 subs, but we are on the final stretch to 2,000 subs. With the last video, we are well above 1,800. We need about 100, 150 more to go, and we can absolutely get there in the next few days. And so I'm really excited to reach that kind of second milestone. The next one for me would probably be 4,000 or 5,000, and of course 10,000 is going to be huge, but I can't thank you guys enough. Thank you guys for all the feedback, continuing to come back, check out the videos, and just support this channel. If you want to stop hearing me plug about getting close to 2,000, make sure that you're subscribed. As after we hit 2,000, I will back off for a while, but we are getting so close and there's so much hype around it. I'm excited. I hope that you guys are excited as well. For all of you guys that have been here since 100, 200, I hope that you are excited as well. And so we are hyping it up as much as we can. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and see if we can get the 4 in a row. Okay, nope. That tracks. So we got some boosters. The next one, 200 credits. That's not bad. That helps us get to the next log. You can get avatars from this. Looks like we have a new avatar. Absolutely. I didn't know you could unlock avatars from the collection log. We will try it out until we get a better one. And then we get Dracula. Guys, so we have 11 cards left. We have quite a few good cards remaining to pull. In like Mystique, Wong, Gambit, we have Black Widow, we have some really cool cards. Dracula is one of the ones we've been looking forward to. He's a pretty versatile card. He makes a discard deck so much more viable because then you can drop Dracula. You can continue to discard cards through your last turn, knowing that Dracula is going to pull back in your Apocalypse. And so last turn you can drop all your swarms, you can drop a bunch of discard cards, and then you know each one is going to trigger your Apocalypse. That at the end of the game is going to be discarded, and Dracula is going to absorb that power. And so he is really good in a discard style deck. He's also good in like a mid-range or a swarm style deck where you have one large minion and you know that you're going to be able to dump your entire hand onto the board. He will then be able to have some pretty consistent power, and whenever that's an infinite, whenever the only large minion that you're running is an infinite, that's pretty scary to be able to dump all of your cards. So like Bishop and Angela and all of those large cards, all of those cards that get buffed up over time, and then still have a 20 power that drops in on the last turn is just so crazy. And the fact that his ability triggers after the final turn means that he is immune from Shang-Chi. You're going to be able to avoid that Shang-Chi turn from having Dracula for some pretty cool interactions. You can avoid the Shang-Chi. You don't have to worry about getting hit and having your Dracula destroyed because he's not going to have that power level until after the final turn has resolved. And then this also messes with Captain Marvel just a little bit because then there are 2 kind of at the end of the game type effects. And so it can mess with Captain Marvel's movement as well. And so with that being said, we are going to go ahead and jump into a deck build. I don't know for sure what we're going to run. I know that his probably best list is a discard style deck, but I kind of want like Wong in that deck list so that we can really emphasize our discards. And so I don't know for sure, but we're going to go ahead and jump over into the deck draft and see what we come up with. All right, so we did end up drafting a discard deck. And this one is pretty similar to the one that we ran with Black Cat a couple of videos ago, but I've taken a few steps to kind of optimize it a bit. In the Black Cat one, we did run an Angela, but in this one we opted to take Angela out for a higher priority card. We also decided to drop the Black Cat in place of Dracula. Black Cat did okay. I did like the interaction where she would discard from our hand, so our discard cards were more likely to hit our key targets in our swarm or our apocalypse. But I feel like with Dracula, we're going to want to be discarding all the way up till the last turn. And so having more of our discard cards to drop on that last turn, I think will be beneficial. We're going to be able to send out 2 or 3 of them onto the board all on that last turn to push several discards through to buff up our apocalypse and then also buff up our Dracula in the process. So we subbed out Angela. We subbed out Black Cat for Dracula and America Chavez. So America Chavez is going to help us get our Morbius, our Collector, our Swarm, Nakia earlier in the game, where it's going to be more beneficial to us. Now, there will be some games where we want to drop Chavez onto the board, or maybe we want to drop Apocalypse onto the board to redistribute that power. Then we can have the other one be absorbed by our Dracula. But I feel like with how many high priority targets this deck has, you want to have your Hellcow, your Morbius, your Collector more often than not, and Chavez is going to help us do that earlier. And so since we covered this a few videos ago, I'm going to just run through this really quickly. First up, we have our Morbius and our Collector. Both of these get buffed up whenever we discard a card. Morbius will be buffed up anytime we discard any card. Collector will only be buffed up when we discard either Swarm or Apocalypse. And then we have Swarm, which is one of our primary targets to be discarded. We're going to be able to buff up Swarm with Nakia. Every time that Swarm is discarded, it's going to duplicate itself. So we discard it once, it's going to have 2 copies in our hand. We discard it twice, we're going to have 3 copies, 3 times 4 copies, so on and so forth. And so you can get a pretty good upside or army of Swarms going pretty quickly, but we need to be careful with this. If we are space limited, maybe we only let it discard a couple of times so that we have space for Dracula to be a guaranteed discard of Apocalypse. Then we have Apocalypse. When you discard this from your hand, put it back with +4 power. And then we have our discard engine. So we have Blade, which discards a random card. We have Lady Sif, who will always target the highest cost card from our hand. So that is primarily going to be our Apocalypse. We have Hellcow, who discards 2 cards from your hand, so a very good discard card. We have Moon Knight. You could also run like something like a Gambit, but we don't have Gambit yet. Moon Knight is going to discard a card from our hand, but also discard a card from the opponent's hand. We could switch this out for a Swordmaster, something a little bit higher power, but I like the interaction of trying to make the opponent discard their key card that they're holding for the last turn. And then we have Colleen Wing. This is going to be able to guarantee discard our Swarm if we don't have any of the other low cost cards in our hand, or if Swarm has been discarded at least once. Colleen Wing is going to be a guaranteed discard for our Swarm. Then we have our new card in Dracula and Chavez, as we kind of briefly touched on. She is there to help us even out the rest of our draws. And then there are times where that 9 power is going to be good to be discarded into Dracula, or it's going to be good to play onto the board and let Dracula absorb our Apocalypse. But that is the rundown of the deck. We are going to go ahead and jump in, and I feel like this deck list is going to be pretty solid. So I'm really excited to test it out and finally test out our Dracula. Okay, so first up we have Mog, and they may not be a human, I don't know. But we do have our Morbius, which is one of our high priority cards to get. And so we're actually going to play our Morbius. Typically our Collector will get larger though. We're going to play our Collector into Miniaturized Lab. That is going to let us buff up and get power in there during the turns that it's locked down for some pretty good upside. The Dark Dimension is a pretty rough location for us. It's definitely not great. Oof. And then we have Kiln here. So I think what we do is, do we go ahead and drop our Nakia to curve out and make sure that these are buffed up? I think we drop our Morbius. Next turn we'll be able to drop both Lady Sif and Hellcow if that's the direction we need to go. We want to have a pretty good power push into Kiln, and so then maybe it's that we drop these 2, which discards our Apocalypse, or we drop our Dracula there and just hide our discard cards into the Dark Dimension, which will give us a lot of late game power push, which might be worthwhile. As long as we don't draw into a Swarm, we should be okay. I think this is actually a pretty good play line. We're going to lock into Kiln. We're going to be able to get it to absorb whatever we need to. Morbius is going to buff up here. Collector is going to buff up pretty decently in Miniaturized Lab. And we can even hide our discard card. So I like this play line quite a bit. Oh, they have a Dracula too? Oh my gosh. So then they also have a Calling Wing. We do have a Morbius, so we're going to get a little upside there, but what are the chances? And so do we... Oh, we can't. So I was going to directly play Lady Sif, but we can't. So we're going to just drop our discard cards into the dark dimension here. They're going to turn up on the last turn. So what we're going to be able to do is either play our Chavez outright and then our Hellcow on the first discard, because Hellcow typically won't... I think it won't discard the same card twice. So Hellcow being the first one that flips will let us discard our Nakia without any issue. All of the other ones are going to hit our Apocalypse here. And so we're going to get a pretty decently sized Apocalypse. So 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be a 20 power Apocalypse that goes into the kiln location. Our Collector is going to buff up. Our Morbius is going to buff up as well. We're going to get some pretty decent upside here. Ooh, and they use a Moon Girl in their deck. Interesting. And so their Moon Girl does buff up their Collector, but they don't have as solid of discard cards. We're going to have a much higher Apocalypse come into our Dracula lane. Our Morbius is going to be larger than their Calling Wing. We're just going to have a very, very good last turn. I think we win all 3 lanes here, actually. And so we're just letting the discards play out. All of them are going to hit the guaranteed Apocalypse here. It feels so nice to be able to drop your discard cards on the into the last turn and not have to worry about manually playing your Apocalypse. That gives you so much more flexibility to just do some insane power pushes. And so this was definitely not the most ideal game, but we pumped out a lot of power. And then the thing that I like with Dracula is, even if you're anticipating that he absorbs the power and then let's say they extend the game with a magic, you still have the flexibility to either redirect that power or let it absorb into your Dracula. But overall, very good first game out. Okay, so next up we have Reimagine. And in our starting hand, we do have our Apocalypse. But unfortunately, we are going to swap hands on turn 6. So that makes this a little bit more difficult. We have to play around that. And so we don't necessarily want to discard our Apocalypse as much, because if we discard him a bunch of times and then send him their way, we can give him a 20 power Apocalypse. And so we'll have to get kind of sneaky on how we win here. But depending on the rest of the locations, we don't want to discard our Apocalypse. The game says here, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it myself. So I think we pass this turn as well. Ooh, so they do change the location. Okay. And so, oh no, why, Sakar, why? That's awful. Okay. And so then we draw into Asgard, so we're not going to be able to keep re-triggering our Apocalypse discard, but we can still get our Swarm discard going. I think, do we hold off one turn here? Or do we just drop maybe Moon Knight? To see what it hits. We still have pretty good resources. It makes them discard one of their cards. We know that they've already discarded one and pulled in their Odin. And so we get the incredible upside, the 1 in 4 shot from our Moon Knight to hit Swarm. So very, very beautiful. And then we do draw into our Dracula here. So we want to be winning this lane at the end of this turn though. So I think we go with our Calling Wing, our guaranteed Swarm trigger here. And then next turn, we can go with our Dracula. Do we go with Blade here? It could potentially discard our Dracula though. I think we don't. Maybe do we cap this lane out? Depends how many resources they're going to invest there. And if we think they can invest over 7 resources with 4 energy, I don't think they can. So we're not going to drop our Swarm. We want to... Ooh, and they have a Wong. So Wong, we're starting to see Wong a lot more often. Ooh, and maybe we should have dropped one of the Swarm, because now we couldn't draw all of the cards that we needed. We only drew 1, which we would have drawn anyways from our turn. Unfortunate. Okay. So maybe we play Collector here. Do we play one of our Swarms? Maybe we don't play around Dracula this game. So we know next turn we're going to draw into Chavez, so we don't care about Blade getting triggered. I think we leave our 3 Swarms to give it the most chance to trigger our Swarm. We're not going to get to the point where we have 7 Swarms, so we should be okay there. And then we're going to be able to play Chavez naturally next turn, and then this will buff up our Collector a decent amount, and we'll just hope that it's enough to keep us in the lead. So we know that their Asgard location is capped out all we have to do is drop our Chavez there to swing that one. Unless they have a buff that goes into it, that's going to give us the win here. And then we just fill up, fill up the board. We just fill up the board with the rest of the swarms here. Our swarm army coming down. They do flip second. And so if they're doing, I don't know, maybe a gambit and they're just kind of doing the spray and pray, I think we have enough cards to kind of divert those odds as much as possible. And then maybe they have something a little bit better. We don't know. They had a white tiger double on reveal. And so maybe they have something cool. They had an Odin, so they would have been able to re-trigger the re-triggers. So they have Spider-Woman. So an interesting deck. They weren't able to push a lot of power, and we do still keep all 3 lanes. But an interesting deck idea. I think it's difficult to put into practice because Wong is such an expensive card that you want some really powerful on reveal cards in return. So if you hold him and then drop something like Debris, it seems like it's a little bit too late at that point, but it's an interesting idea nonetheless. I would like to see if this is able to be refined and how it ends up turning out. So next up we have Hirn Purat. Maybe? I don't know. But we do have Blade, we have Moon Knight. Now, typically I don't play Blade right off the bat, but we have 2 cards that we're okay with getting discarded in our Apocalypse and our Swarm. And so we have a 2 out of 3. We have a 66% chance of getting the good upside here, which we do hit, which is going to let us start snowballing much earlier. And so now if we draw into like Nakia, and then if we get our other discard cards, we have a better chance of hitting these targets now that there's more of them. And then ideally we'll draw into like our Morbius, our Collector. But for this turn, I think we just wait. Next turn we will drop our Nakia, and they had the Collector off the draw, which is good for them. And then we do have our Calling Wing, so we know that we're going to be able to get a guaranteed target of Swarm here. So I'm going to drop our Nakia into Muir Island so that she can start getting buffed up. And then next turn we will probably drop our Calling Wing and maybe a Swarm as well into Muir Island so that they get buffed over time. And so we can do Calling Wing, we can do one of the Swarms. We know that Calling Wing is going to grab one of the other ones. And then next turn, depending on what we draw into, we can do both Moon Knight and Hellcow to still have the guaranteed discard. And so then we'd be able to guarantee that it triggers either a Swarm or an Apocalypse. And so we have the Calling Wing. We do start getting the upside of Muir Island. We're going to start buffing up more consistently. We're going to get +3 each turn. They're only going to get +2. I mean, until they play another card there. But until they do, we do get the increased upside. And then we do draw into our Collector here. So I think we do something like, we know we're going to draw into Chavez next turn. And so do we go away from that and just focus on our Apocalypse here? So we can do Hellcow, we can do a Moon Knight, we can do Swarm, and that will leave us the ability to drop our Apocalypse wherever we want. It does kind of telegraph our power level a little bit more than I would like, but I think that's okay. And unfortunately, our Moon Knight here will trigger. Actually, no. Let's do Collector. Let's do Hellcow. Let's do one Swarm. And so we are not going to do our Moon Knight with them wanting to discard cards. We don't want to play into that and help them. And so we did end up calling an audible last minute. This is going to give us some Swarms that we're able to drop on the last turn. We're going to have Apocalypse that we can direct as needed, and it gives us a little more flexibility, and it's going to make it a little bit harder for them to kind of judge where that power level should be or where that power level is going to be. And so then we get our Apocalypse. We are buffing up our Collector pretty decently, and then we draw into Chavez. Okay. So they do end up retreating. We did have the 2 Swarms, the Apocalypse, that we were able to throw down onto the board to help impact the board. And so overall, not an ideal play line, but this deck has so many paths to those large cards that it feels really consistent. Whether you have your Dracula, whether you buff up your Swarm, whether you get your Apocalypse discarded 10 times, you have a lot of avenues to that power level. Okay, so next up we have Hollow Patch, and they snap, so we'll go ahead and snap as well. It's a little snappy, but we do have our Swarm. I didn't even look at our hand before we snapped. At least we have a good starting hand. We do have Nakia, we do have Swarm, so we're gonna be able to drop Nakia on 3. We draw into our Morbius, which is amazing because Morbius is an ongoing ability. Collector is not, but Morbius is ongoing. So every card that we discard is going to buff up Morbius by +4 instead of the normal +2. And so that is a very good card for us for this game, and a very good location for us as well. And they discard a Death. So that tells me they may be running a Hela deck, because they wanted that guaranteed discard from their Lady Sif there. And so let's go ahead and we can drop our Nakia. It doesn't necessarily matter where. We're going to go ahead and drop it in the right hand side, which will buff up our Swarm, the Swarm being the primary target, because each time Swarm is discarded now, it will come back into our hand already buffed up. And so I think maybe, do we kind of lock it down and force what gets discarded? So we can play all but 2 of our cards. Hellcow is the first, so it will guarantee that it discards our Calling Wing, which is a little unfortunate, but it also discards our Swarm, and then that leaves only Swarm for our Blade to hit, and all of which are going to buff up our Morbius. And so then they use a Ghost Rider, which resummons their Death, so maybe it's just a large minion deck instead of a Hela deck here. But I think we do have a pretty decent shot at pushing enough power to overpower whatever it is that they end up with, unless we draw nothing but rocks. So we're just going to drop our rock in the middle location, and then we're going to draw into Chavez next turn, which is pretty unfortunate that the rocks, the Subterranea really disrupted us. Can this Jubilee pull a rock, please? Thank you. Oh, and then they have Swarm? What kind of deck are you running? And so 9, so 14 would give us 20. We could barely win this lane. And then we could push ahead in here and here. I don't know where they're going to be planning on playing power. It looks like they're going to have 2 Swarms, so maybe they will play them here. Maybe we shy away from Subterranea because we're so far behind. And maybe we go with Chavez here and then our Swarms here. That's what we're going to lock in with. I bet we lose for some reason. They seem like they have some really high power cards. They drop a Giganto, which is not enough to overcome our redirected Chavez Swarm in this left-handed lane. And so then they just drop their Swarms elsewhere. But even if we had dropped our Chavez and Swarm here, it would have been 14. They would have beat us here. So that redirect saved us the game and allowed us to come out on top. All right, so next up we have Blue Box. And we have Morbius, we have Dracula, but we are limited by the space that we can play. We don't have any way to push power into the Sanctum Sanctorum, which is one of the drawbacks of this deck, is that it has a really hard time pushing power into other lanes. And any substitute or any tech cards that could do that just feel like it's taking away from the core archetype. And so typically you just, if you see this, you kind of tuck tail and run, or you just play around it, knowing that you're going to be at a very big disadvantage. And so we're going to play our Morbius into Mojo World here. And then we do draw into our Apocalypse. So we're going to be able to kind of start that discard trigger happening. And so we're going to go ahead and drop our Lady Sif this turn. Next turn we will drop our Apocalypse. And we probably should be putting these cards into Mojo World. But if we draw into a Swarm, then we could kind of do that. So I'm going to drop our Dracula into Mojo World. I'm actually going to drop our Dracula into Stark Tower here instead. And then next turn, we know that we're going to be able to play something like a Moon Knight and a Collector. And then the last turn we'd be able to play at least a Chavez. And so we know that we're going to be able to get some upside here, and we're going to be able to cap this location out. And so we can do something like this, which would discard 2 cards for us. That allows us to play Chavez here next turn, or we could go with a Moon Knight to try to discard something that they didn't want discarded. But I think we go with this instead. I think this gives us the most kind of power push. It'll buff up our Collector, our Morbius, and then Dracula is going to buff up our Collector and our Morbius once it discards. And so they get a Rogue, which steals our Morbius, which is really unfortunate. But we do have Collector to kind of come in and keep that power level consistent, because they're not really going to get much upside out of Rogue other than hampering our Morbius. And so we do have a 16 power Apocalypse, which isn't terrible, and it will trigger our Collector to buff up once. We just have to hope that this is enough power to keep us over that level, and then our Dracula will actually absorb the 16 power here. And so then right now we'd be ahead. If they push any more power there, then maybe they win it, but they also have to push 2 power here to make sure we don't get the Mojo buff here. So all they do is push a card into the Stark Tower, which is not advised, because we are going to win this location by more than 100, which is definitely more than their 30. So they were going with the coin flip. They were hoping that Wolverine would bounce into Sanctum Sanctorum. They would then, of course, lock down this location, and then they would have won the game. So it came down to a coin flip. We got the lucky upside that Wolverine stayed here, and we got the negative luck of Apocalypse not being absorbed by Dracula. It was the Moon Knight instead. But we still got very, very lucky. Very close game, Blue Box. But we called the right side of the coin this time. All right, and so with that last game out of the way, we are going to go ahead and end the video here. We have our kind of standard 5 matches, and I think we ended up losing 1 game. The other 2 that we didn't end up showing were against bots. And so this deck list performed very, very well. Very, very consistent. You have a lot of kind of key resources in your Apocalypse, your Morbius, your Collector. And then Chavez did seem to help the consistency by helping us get some of those key cards in our hand sooner so that we could get the increased upside from them. But this deck list feels very, very strong. Like, I haven't played a deck list that felt this strong or this consistent probably since playing like a Sarah deck or a Zoo deck. This one is probably pretty dangerous. I could see this type of deck list being ran very often and then becoming meta and then counter meta shifting to running like a wave or something similar to kind of slow down the rate that we can play. So like slow down the amount of swarms that we can send out. Maybe Sandman. Maybe this goes back to like that Sandman ongoing list that we built. But this deck list does feel very, very strong. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. We are going to go ahead and end the video here. Thank you guys again for watching the video, for coming back time and time again, and just continuing to enjoy the content and enjoy the channel. So if you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below, leave a comment. It helps the channel grow and expand. It helps the video get to a larger audience so that we can share our small community with others. And so I hope you guys enjoyed it. This has been TLSG. Later, guys.